We're in rural western Pennsylvania, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We're on our way to a little town called Phillipsburg. And the reason we're going to Phillipsburg is because there's a private prison there that's about to close. The Moshannon Valley Correctional Center was a prison for federal inmates. But the government didn't run it. It paid a private company to run it, about $60 per prisoner per day. Money the company used to turn a profit. As part of a larger effort to phase out its use of private prisons, the government didn't renew the prison's contract this year. When it closed, it took nearly 300 jobs with it. Jobs with starting salaries more than 4 times the minimum wage.
The area has been economically depressed for decades. That was a godsend to have that facility here.
The prison staff didn't have permission to talk to the press, but one guard agreed to speak with us anonymously. Do you come from a corrections background, or was this the first time you had done this kind of work?
It's the first time.
And were there a lot of people like that?
I would say the majority of the initial hiring, there aren't many jobs like this one.
What does that mean for you? I mean, are you going to have to change industries entirely?
I'll have to make a lot of changes across the board. Now you start at the bottom of the ladder again. Maybe in 10 or 12 years, you get back to where you are right now financially.
Along with the jobs, the prison gave $500,000 in tax revenue to the local school district. These private prison companies, one of their sort of PR moves is they try and portray themselves as sort of saviors of these little towns. But if you look at a place like Phillipsburg, it still has a really high poverty rate. The city itself is constantly cash-strapped. So it's not like these companies do enough to actually save these cities from the underlying social and economic problems that afflict them, but they do just enough to make them dependent. Private prisons are a distinctly American invention and a product of the Reagan era.
Good evening. Usually I talk with you from my office in the West Wing of the White House, but tonight there's something special to talk about.
While the war on drugs sent millions to prison, Reaganomics called for privatizing as much of government as possible. Enterprising men of business saw an opportunity.
Corrections Corporation of America was founded with one goal in mind: provide an innovative alternative to the administrative and budgetary constraints of the existing corrections and detention system.
Private prison companies say they do just as good a job at locking people up as the government does, only they do it more cheaply and efficiently. But critics say they only make a profit by cutting costs on basics like food and healthcare, and that leads to abuse and neglect. Today, the industry is worth more than $5 billion, but it's also in serious trouble. So when people talk about the private prison industry, they're really only talking about 2 companies, the Geo Group and CoreCivic. It's generally pretty hard to get information out of these companies directly, but luckily they're publicly traded, which means that they have to file paperwork with the federal government every year, and the story that they tell is not a very good one. Public opposition has become so strong that it's compromising their ability to function as businesses. For example, this is the Geo Group's latest annual report. In these reports, they have to outline the risks that they're facing. First, major policy changes threaten the company's bottom line, starting with President Biden ordering the DOJ not to renew any private prison contracts. Then there's the company's debt, which has ballooned more than threefold in the last 10 years. At the same time, it's lost financing from several big banks and pension funds. So what does this all mean taken together? You have a company that's facing growing public opposition, rapidly losing contracts, ballooning debt. That's a downward spiral. The movement against private prisons gained traction alongside the larger movement against mass incarceration. One of its biggest victories came when it successfully pressured major banks to divest from the industry. Morgan Simon is a part of that movement. She's an impact investor, meaning she helps people invest their money in ways that don't conflict with their values.
When you look at who the owners are of Geo Group and CoreCivic, the 2 largest are Vanguard and BlackRock. And for a lot of folks, that might mean that their retirement fund is somehow connected to those entities, and that a lot of us might own prisons without even knowing it.
Like I could have money from my 401k going to Geo Group or CoreCivic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's where sometimes when we're pushing on politicians to take actions, well, we need to look at ourselves too. And that could be as simple as just looking at, could I bank with a community bank or a credit union? Could I go to my HR director and say, hey, is there a social option that we could have on this retirement fund?
Last year, CoreCivic sued Simon for defamation, claiming she and her investment firm had misrepresented the company's practices. The suit was dismissed a few months later and is now under appeal. Why do you think CoreCivic sued you?
I think that the idea that it is okay to lock people up for profit is threatened by people like me. Policy or money are kind of the two main levers that we have to make change, and I just chose the path of money.
CoreCivic and the Geo Group gave us statements where they defended the quality of service they provide and accused activists of waging a lies-based campaign and spreading false narratives about them. Both also said they don't play a role in setting policies that determine who gets incarcerated. Nevertheless, they face a growing number of powerful people who would rather see them gone.
For far too long, Congress has enacted policies that fail millions of men, women, and children by expanding our carceral state and
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley introduced the People's Justice Guarantee, a resolution that, among many other things, would make it impossible to profit off of incarceration in any way. So, the resolution that you introduced, if enacted, would effectively put these companies out of business. In your view, that's the intention?
Yeah, good, yeah. No, absolutely.
Just want to make that clear.
No, I mean, let me just try to contextualize this in the most, in a people-centered way. When you're just incentivized by profit, then you don't really care about the quality of the services. So not only are you profiting over providing the most basic of services, but then also there's no empathy. So it's just exploitive all the way around.
These companies say, well, we don't make the policies that decide who gets incarcerated and who doesn't, or for how long. We are simply an instrument of government to enact those policies. That's essentially
the thing is that there is a complicitness in that, okay? You're sort of trying to have it both ways. So you're saying you're not the driver of it, but you're also not working actively to dismantle it. None of this is naturally occurring. Like, this didn't just spontaneously combust. Oppression, confinement, exploitation. This has all been legislated.
The private prison industry in the United States is in serious trouble, but they're finding ways to adapt, fight back, survive, in some cases actually thrive. One way they've done that is to focus on a population that the government is still willing to lock up in for-profit facilities: immigrants. 8 out of 10 immigrants in ICE custody are in private detention centers. That means facilities like this one are more valuable to the business than ever. The Adelanto ICE Processing Center in Southern California, owned and operated by the Geo Group, is one of the most lucrative detention centers in the country. It's also one of the most infamous. Several detainees have died there. When federal inspectors visited the facility in 2018, they found egregious violations, including nooses in detainee cells and inadequate medical care. At the time, the Geo Group disputed some of the inspectors' findings while also taking steps to address them. In the 2.5 years that Jose Topete was detained at Adelanto, he filed several official grievances alleging instances of abuse and medical neglect. He says that once, after a surgical procedure, staff failed to clean and dress his wounds for days.
Nunca llegaron a desinfectarme, a darme ropa limpia.
¿Cuántos días transcurrieron sin recibir el cuidado?
Como 6 días. 6 días.
Topete says he finally got attention, but only after he got in touch with the Mexican consulate, which complained on his behalf.
So, entonces me comienzan a decir, pues, nosotros agarramos un correo electrónico que según te estás muriendo, que te estás desangrando, que estás tirando mucha sangre. So, me hicieron bajarme la ropa ahí, enfrente de las security mujeres y enfrente de todos los detenidos. So, yo me bajé la ropa. So, cuando me bajo el pantalón y miran todos mis calzones llenos de sangre, uno de ellos grita, ¡ah! So, entonces ya cuando ellos miraron que era verdad lo que yo había reportado, se me acercaron y me dijeron, por favor, otra vez que pase algo, no reportes nada para afuera. Habla con nosotros aquí. Porque lo que hacen adentro es cubrir. Todo el personal de Geo, incluyendo ICE, se cubren entre ellos mismos. Pues ahí en esa compañía lo que les interesa es hacer dinero nomás.
In a statement, ICE said they ensure detainees are treated humanely and provided appropriate medical care. The Geo Group said they strongly deny these allegations, which are being advanced by radical special interest groups with a politically motivated agenda. In 2019, right when the contract for Adelanto was due to run out, California passed a law banning new contracts for private detention centers of any kind. This was an existential threat to the facility, possibly to the GEO Group itself. So the company moved quickly. Just 13 days before the ban was set to take effect, GEO signed a brand new 15-year contract with ICE, worth more than $2 billion. And it included a bonus, an additional 750 beds in a building next door, which the company used to run as a state prison. Back from the brink, Adelanto was not only still open, it was now the largest private immigrant detention center in the nation. To pull this off, GEO needed the cooperation of the local government, but they encountered some unexpected resistance from a newly elected member of the city council named Stevana Evans.
How would you describe the relationship between GEO and the city?
I think between GEO and the city, it's a great relationship. GEO gets what they need, and they give the city a few crumbs, and the city's happy with that. But what's that worth?
At one point, Evans refused to sign some papers that GEO needed her to sign. She says the company flew its CEO, George Zoli, who earns more than $5 million a year, out to Adelanto.
Can you tell me more about that meeting with George Zoli?
It was very awkward and heated. He didn't understand why I wouldn't agree to this, and he's always done great things for the city, and they donate money here and there, and all the things. And I don't remember exactly verbatim until the point where he, slammed his hands on the table, he's beat red, and he tells me, if you don't sign these letters today, then I'm not gonna pay you guys anything anymore, and we're not going to basically be good partners with the city.
The company eventually got what it needed from the city, and it spent some money in the process. During last year's race for city council, the GEO Group donated $45,000 to a local PAC called the Inland Empire Taxpayers Association. That PAC, in turn, spent more than $35,000 to support candidates who had backed the GEO Group in the past. The company didn't respond to questions about its political donations.
For a place like this, is that a lot of money?
In Adelanto, most definitely. Ed Camargo wins his seats on $1,000 or less. Me, a newcomer, won my seat on $4,000. So is that a lot of money in this city? Heck yeah, it is.
What do you make of the fact that GEO donated this money to independent PACs, which then went and spent the money on behalf of these candidates?
Dark money. And there's no other way to think about it.
Because if they hadn't done that, then whatever that money was spent on, whether it's mailers or signs or whatever, there would have to be the fine print that says, this message was paid for by
GEO. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to say that because they gave the money to a PAC.
Now it's some random PAC. This is how they do this in all small cities. But they pick these small cities that have, small populations. They don't need a lot of people to vote. And they get council members and they do what they got to do to get them in. So nobody's looking. And that's how they get away with it.
It may be an industry in decline, but the US still has more people in for-profit prisons than any other country in the world. And for now, the money keeps coming in. For Adelanto, ICE pays the GEO Group at least $124.10 per day per bed. That means Jose Topete, who was there for 925 days, made the company a minimum revenue of $114,792.50.
What do you think needs to happen to this place?
Necesitamos cerrar estos lugares. Cerrarlos. Que no existan estos lugares. Que no quieren que la gente se dé cuenta de lo que está pasando adentro. Todos los abusos que pasan adentro cubren todo eso. Que no quieren que la gente en las calles se dé cuenta de lo que pasa adentro, lo que sufrimos allá adentro.